But we begin tonight with Sean Parise. Sean served as a juror in the trial of former correctional officer Jonah Levy. He was charged in connection with the death of Messiah Nantwi at Mid-York Correctional Facility. A jury found him guilty of manslaughter, assault, and other charges. Sean is my brother-in-law, and I saw the impact that serving on the jury had on him. We recorded an interview last week right here in the 95.5 FM studio. I asked him about the psychological toll his jury duty service had on him and his fellow jurors. Here's my conversation with Sean Parise.
Now, Ron, it was probably the most difficult things I've done in a long time. They did roughly give you some idea what you were getting into before they started the trial, gave you some amount of disclosure just to let you know this is going to be very abrasive and very rough subject matter, but it doesn't really prepare you for what this is going into it. There's a significant amount of compartmentalization you have to do. Again, you're sworn in as a juror. You have to take that seriously, and you're making sure not to disclose any information. You're not to talk to anybody about anything you're seeing, even the fellow jurors. You need to basically just absorb what they're giving you, what you're seeing in the courtroom, go home and just park it for the day, then resume the next. So I was ready to do that, but the topic matter itself, I wasn't aware that this would actually be a murder trial until you kind of get into it and start seeing the logistics of what you're kind of confronting. Emotionally, mentally, I probably was like, yeah, sure, it's the right thing to do, but you're not really prepared for something like that until you start kind of diving in and understanding it.
Sean says jurors were warned that the case could involve difficult material, but as the trial began, he realized that being warned and actually sitting through the evidence were two very different things.
It was a bit of a maze to navigate, and you're basically watching body camera captures, some of which were very revealing, some of which were, you only had audio cues because there were definitely segments of the incident where these correctional officers were basically facing away, seemingly very implicitly from the activities going on in the cell. So you had to kind of infer based on that context. On top of that, you've got autopsy pictures. That's probably the one thing that stuck with me the most in that case is...
What did you see?
Well, the deceased, the incarcerated individual, Messiah, basically it's a lot of autopsy footage that showed the wounds they suffered, the degree of the assault that had happened to him.
Can you describe it?
Difficult to actually look at, especially when you're in the jury room and you actually are presented then at the end of the case with the evidence. You're seeing basically Messiah there with a deceased at that point in time with a boot print, pictures of different parts of his body, showing the wounds, showing a lot of what he endured going through that. A lot of that sticks with you. There's one thing, actually two things I'll say that probably stuck with me the most. We're just seeing basically just the boot print in his head in the autopsy photos. And going back to the body camera footage, this was kind of drawn out and narrated differently by both prosecution and defense, but there are elements there where you hear a loud bang in the background, which we kind of correlated to Messiah having his head kicked into a cabinet by one of the correctional officers. So it's the exposure to seeing like the visual cues, the audio cues repeatedly. Yeah. There are things there that I've seen and I heard that stuck with me for days and weeks after the fact.
The evidence was disturbing enough on its own, but Sean says one of the hardest parts was that jurors could not talk about what they were seeing and hearing, not with friends, not with family, not even with each other, until deliberations began.
You can't discuss anything until the case is completed at that point, but at least you have, it feels like a support group. And this felt even more challenging because I actually knew one of the individuals also selected for that same jury.
Yeah.
And any discussion we had
and you weren't allowed to discuss it.
No, we would talk about anything and everything but the case, just to kind of get our minds off of it.
What was it like for you during those 6 days when you had to watch this stuff and hear this stuff all day long, a human being being beaten to death, and you had to sift through that evidence all day long and then not discuss it with a living soul all night long? What was that like for you to keep all that inside?
That was...
Because it was such extreme violence too. It's not just like you're watching a violent show. This is a real thing, and you're really forced to give it the gravity that it deserves. And doing so, it must take a toll.
Absolutely. And it's not just what you're seeing and what you're hearing, it's also the weight of consequence. Families are impacted by decisions we're making in this case. We had, I firmly believe, actually probably a relative of the deceased who was sitting in the stands, at least we thought was a relative of the deceased.
Yeah.
We had absolutely the defendant's wife and children present also. So you have all those external factors which you're aware of, but then you have to completely shut out because you really can't take the weight of anything going on outside of the evidence being presented right there and then in the court.
Sean expected the end of the trial to bring relief. Instead, he says, once the trial was over, the symptoms became even harder to ignore.
I lost sleep over it. I know at least one or two of my fellow jurors lost sleep over this. It was not uncommon to wake up in the middle of the night and just have like strong visuals, or you hear something like a car door slam and associate that to things you heard during the evidence presentations. This, honestly, it's something that left me in a very compromised mental, emotional state. I think I was fine up until the trial ended, and then it just was something that kind of persisted for days and maybe a week or two afterwards.
How did it persist? When did you first start to realize that it was lingering? The thoughts.
Pretty much immediately after. You got to think that everything is over, so it just gets shut off. But your emotions are never something that's that easy to control. As much as you think you have complete control over it, your subconscious mind is going to do what it's going to do. And it was really the few days following the trial where it felt like my filter was broken because I had to compartmentalize so much for so long that I did not have, or had very limited capacity to kind of withhold my thoughts or feelings from anybody else around me, friends, coworkers. I felt very compromised. I actually took a little bit of time off from work just to kind of get my head about me. 50% of people who go through jury in a murder trial suffer either from PTSD or anxiety or a combination of both. As I'm talking to the professional through the employee assistance program, trying to get some advice, at least when I'm talking about like the symptoms I'm experiencing in terms of like lack of sleep, responding to audio-visual cues, seeing flashes.
What sort of audio-visual cues do you have a response to now?
At this point, I think a lot of that is stabilized, but I will say for like the first week or two after the trial, it was always whenever I heard a loud slam, like metal on metal, a car door closing quickly, I would associate it very much directly to a lot of what I heard in the courtroom, which was the association of Mazai's head being kicked against a metal cabinet. It brings that right back to you. Middle of the night, I would be woken up and I would kind of have flashes of imagery again of seeing like the autopsy pictures. And the professional I was working with in terms of mental health did verify that sounds like you had. You're working
with now, but you weren't working with then.
Correct. But she did kind of clarify the fact that those symptoms are indicative of PTSD.
Sean reached out for help through his employer because he says that help did not come from the court system. After the trial, did the courts or the judge or anyone try to prepare you for like that there would be lingering psychological effects, or maybe to offer assistance?
Post-trial, no. There was no disclosure about that. There was no offer of help, which is something we kind of joked about between myself and my friend after the fact. Like, this is something that should be kind of baked into the system in terms of providing mental health support, therapy, something. To be honest, because I was working while doing the trial, I received no compensation for even being on the jury for this case. That was the one thing. Thankfully, my employer had this as a free benefit. But that's one thing that I think that should absolutely, for myself, for anyone who's going through a murder trial, this should be something provided by the state or something provided by the court, just to look out for the people who are doing their civic duty.
Sean says he was lucky that his employer offered counseling through an employee assistance program, but he believes jurors should not have to rely on luck.
Thing that I think should be automatically offered, even if the individual, the juror, doesn't feel they need it. Hey, here's a number, here's outreach. Should you experience any symptoms, this is something that we're going to cover for your civic duty. That felt like a bit of an oversight. And that's something that I would definitely recommend for anyone going through this. Is, like I said, depending on the person, I feel like the kinder heart you have, the worse this is going to be for you going through it.
Yeah.
And even the people who felt like they were probably a bit more emotionally braced,
Yeah.
they're still going to suffer some kind of consequence from going through this. More than just a story. Like, this is something that is going to stick with you for the remainder of your life. I absolutely encourage people to do their civic duty.
Yeah.
But at the same time, should you be involved in something like this, plan accordingly, make sure you have that support group for you. They may not understand why you need it, but at the same time, you're going to need that.
Yeah. Well, Sean, thank you for doing your duty as a juror. And also thank you for, having the courage to come on here and to talk about it. This is a aspect of these cases that we don't hear much about. And I think it's really important that someone speaks up for the jurors and to give some support to the people who really you sacrifice so much to be on a jury. And I don't think people realize, like, psychologically what an intense, potentially harmful, difficult experience that must be. So I'm really glad that you came on here today to talk about this.
No, Ron, it's strictly my pleasure. Thank you for giving me the time and the platform. I'd appreciate that.
This is Ron Klopfanstein. Meet me in the hot seat every Monday at 5 p.m. for Hot Seat Media Mondays on 95.5 FM, The Heat.